Yep.
All right. Then, we'll start with the title slide. Today is the Rise and Fall of Digital Equipment Corporation. I'll add that I was at MIT during most of the 70s, working through a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate, but in the wet sciences, meaning biology and then nutrition biochemistry. But I was aware that there was a yellow brick road leading from Cambridge out to Maynard, that many of my fellow students who were in the electrical engineering department were heading this way on graduation to work for Digital Equipment Corporation, or a lot of them ended up seeding many of the other tech companies that were sprinkled around Route 128. So definitely Boston was the tech center pretty much of the world at that time. And I will say, I never did work for DEC, and by the time I got here in 2000, the company was gone. So if you want to read about this book, which is at the library, is also available. You can order it from Amazon, or I think it may even be a Kindle Online version, which has a fairly lengthy chapter about digital. And that includes basically the columns that I wrote over the years, pretty much 2020, and are still posted at Maynard Life Outdoors. So if you go to Maynard Life Outdoors, and you'll see them November 219 through June 220, you'll see about a dozen columns, pretty much touching on what I'm going to cover today. Another way to learn about DEC is to go to Wikipedia. Hopefully most of you are Wikipedia friendly, and Wikipedia has so many articles about digital, not just the company, but almost every single product they ever turned out, the PDPs, the VAXs, DECAs, what else is in there? Just on and on and on, Alta Vista. So this is another place if you're into researching what we're talking about. This is Ken's wedding photo. And I'll back up to a bit before this to say that a bit before he got married, he was in the Navy and also at MIT. So Olson was enlisted in the US Navy in 1944. He was only at age 18 at the time. He entered training at the Navy's radar school, served for a year. He did not see actual military action. Was discharged in 46. He enrolled at MIT, earning a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering in 1950. That department later became Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences, but back then they just called it EE. He continued on to as a graduate student, completed a master's in 52. We'll get to how this fits into that in a moment. Okay, there's this great personal story about how Ken pursued his wife. It seems on vacation between his bachelor's and master's, he was visiting his family in Connecticut, and he was smitten with a woman, Luliki Valve from Finland, who was visiting the neighbors for a week, passing. Nothing came of it at the time, but after she returned to Finland and he went to MIT, he could not stop thinking about her. He wrote her a letter asking if he might visit. Her reply was, "Don't bother." Not taking no for an answer, he took a leave of absence from MIT, took a ship to Europe, got a job as an electrician in Sweden. His family had been of Swedish descent, so he did speak enough Swedish to actually convince someone to hire him for a job in Sweden. But once settled in, he then wrote her again and said, "I'm in Sweden, I'm sort of close. Can I come visit you?" And this time she said, okay. She agreed to see him. He quit his job in Sweden, traveled to Finland, arrived at Luliki's parents' house, and immediately proposed marriage. Again, a man who knows what he wants. The response was again no, from both her and the parents. Not taking this no for an answer, he stayed and continued to court her. After 2 months, the answer changed to yes. They married in Finland, December 12, 1950, and then returned to MIT. Once he graduated, he was working at the Lincoln Lab in Lexington, Massachusetts, just in the area shot. I don't have a date for this, but obviously it's a huge facility. And he worked in MIT's Lincoln Laboratory. This was the center responsible to improve the nation's air defense system primarily. One of his roles, and this is important to realize, one of his roles there was to serve as a liaison with IBM for 13 months. I mention this because this exposure apparently created in him a strong dislike for the strongly hierarchical corporate structure he saw at IBM, which he thought was stifling. And it was the impetus for the development of matrix management at DEC. So he saw what he didn't like and thought of something different when he started his own company. It was at Lincoln Labs that seminal work was also being done on transition from vacuum tubes to transistors in computers named TXO and TX2. Okay, the rise and fall of DEC, a 41-year arc. So in 1957, he left Lincoln and he started a business on a shoestring, basically renting about 9,000 square feet in one of the buildings here at the complex, showing up on weekends with his buddies to paint it, buying furniture on time from a furniture store here in town, and really low level. But their success rested on transistor-based, small by mainframe standards, computers that provide important things, real-time computing instead of punch cards you turn in and get your results the next day, and time sharing, meaning a computer could work for many people at the same time rather than be dedicated to one job at a time. The niche that came to be known as mini computers led to Governor Sargent at one point declaring Maynard the mini computer capital of the world in 1971. So we saw they started working early, came up with the PDP line, improved that to PDP-8, went public in 1966, the PDP-11, and then switching to the VAX in 77. In 90, we're pretty much getting close to the maximum of the company, well over 100,000 employees, international, what are we saying, 14 billion in annual sales. Stock valuation put the capitalization of the company, I think, was north of 25 billion. And for a number of reasons we'll touch on later, this was sort of the peak. No one could, at this point, foresee a downfall in the company. By 91, the company was losing money, layoffs started, and by 98, it had shrunk itself to the point that it could sell itself to Compaq. So building 12 is again where they started. They rented some space here. Ken Olson and Harlan Anderson visited in 57, rented the space. The mill had been a woolen mill for 100 years. So you have to realize you have these huge rooms, high ceilings, no air conditioning, not much heat, crude structures, wooden floors, a lot of things sort of saturated with the smell of sheep and lanolin. And in the summer, if you open the windows to get some cool air, you end up with pigeons inside the rooms. So Ken talks about trying to chase the pigeons out. A tenant had gone bankrupt. The mill rented space to them. They bought furniture, as I said, from Gruber Brothers here in town. Over the years, DEC rented more and more space, until in 1974, they bought the entire complex, including the mill pond, by the way. And the dam that backs up the Assabet River, and all the way up in Stowe, Lake Boone was part of the purchase. They later turned Lake Boone over to Stowe, basically saying, please accept this lake in lieu of us paying taxes on it. It's a good deal. Well, it's not a lake. The mill, by the way, under its current owner, still does own the pond. The pond is not town property or public property, it is private property. The mill does not want people swimming in the pond. It does not want people boating in the pond. It tolerates people fishing in the pond sometimes. It doesn't want people ice skating on the pond. Startup funding for the company came from $70,000 for the American Research Development Corporation, that was AR&D, a venture capital firm headed by George Doriot, which, remember, we had a quote on the front slide, which says, someone somewhere is building something that will make your product obsolete. That's a charge that every tech company has to take to heart, because the earth does not stand still. DEC first began producing printed circuit logic modules for engineers, hence Digital Equipment Corporation. Finances were slow, close to the bone at the beginning, that DEC could not afford to pay for extra heat on the weekends. So Friday morning, Ken would call the managers to find out the other tenants in the building were going to be paying for heat. Because if they were, he would get free heat. He'd tell everyone, we got to stay and work weekends because we got heat. Again, summer, no air conditioning. Building still stands. Here we are, badge numbers. And this is just a photo was managed to find on the internet. So the point was, Harlan Anderson, Ken's buddy from Lincoln Labs, was employee number 2. Ken's brother, Stan, was number 3. There was a lot of low number pride. If an employee left DEC and came back, they would get their original number back. And again, I'll ask again, how many people here remember their badge numbers? Of course you do, because that was pride. I have ever found no luck to find out who the last hire was or what their badge number was. We do know that Anderson left the company in 1966 after falling out with Olson over a management structure. He wanted to become a venture capitalist himself and authored a book, Learn, Earn, and Return, My Life as a Computer Pioneer. Okay, PDP-1, the first mini computer. DEC's first computer delivery to a customer was November 1960. They were profitable the very first year, 1957. They were selling equipment, but their goal was to start selling computers. This weighed about 1,600 pounds. The cost was $30,000. Yep. Why PDP? The US Congress had decreed that no government agency could purchase a computer until all the computers the government owned were 100% in use. So Digital, already in the equipment business, called this first module a programmed data processor. Hence the PDP became that line. DEC sold only 53 PDP-1s. It's a slow start. One is still on permanent loan to MIT in their history museum. From Harlan Ellison, we had a whole generation of MIT engineering graduates in the electrical engineering department who cut their teeth on our computer because they couldn't get time near the big IBM computers that were at MIT at the time. So again, there it was, access, access, access. Digital was hiring like crazy. So if you note in one of these, it points out light assembly workers, light clean work in our production department for girls and women with good eyesight and nimble fingers, because this was all hand installing of transistors. And it turns out, in Maynard, there were hundreds of women with good eyesight and nimble fingers because they had worked on the woolen mill. And here they're going to go to work at the same place that they're working for better pay, better lighting, better conditions, and the ability to rise up within the company. In fact, one of the points that we make is that women also have what was referred as the parent shift. They could work for part of the day and be home before their kids got home from school. So there's a lot of flexibility. The first 2 women hired were Alma E. Pons, employee number 5, Ken's administrative assistant, and Gloria Perazzo, number 6. Pons was senior management assistant, administrative assistant for 21 years. Perazzo worked in the circuit board production, rising to the level of production manager over an assembly group known as Gloria's Girls. Also was known to drop in at coffee and ask Perazzo if there were any design changes that were causing production problems, because trust me, I know this, an engineer can design a nut and bolt you can't get a wrench to. An engineer can design things on the circuit board too close together for hands to assemble them. So unless you're actually the engineer showing up in production, you can make mistakes that other people have to suffer with. A list of the initial 100 employees shows that 1/3 were women. Women are perceived as excelling at precision work. Many had worked in the same building, as I said, when it was turning raw wool into finished goods. If you aren't familiar with the history of Maynard, it was 1846 that the woolen mill was started by Amory Maynard and his partner, Mr. Knight, who came here with experience and money and realized that what they could do here is buy the small dam on Mill Street, which was basically the wood furniture business, create a much larger dam upstream, create a mill much further downstream. The reason I say this up and down is important and connect them with a canal is that power comes from vertical drop. So the larger vertical drop you can get for the same amount of water, the more power you can get. So by doing this, dam up, mill down, they created enough power to run that mill until the next evolution of energy came in when coal was being mined in Pennsylvania and brought here by railroad, and they switched over to mostly steam. But for those initial early critical years, it was water powered. The first woman engineer was Barbara Stephenson, employee number 71, recruited personally by Olson from MIT in 1961. When dealing with clients calling for technical help, and she was answering the phone in the tech department, she had to convince them they kept on asking for a real computer engineer, meaning a man, and she explained how that's not going to work, and it was going to be her. And she was, they say, to prove her competence and her excellence, and stayed with the company quite a time. Women were promoted from within. Roseanne Giordano was hired in marketing in 1979, promoted in 1984 to become the company's first woman vice president. Angela Cosette rose as administrative assistant to manager of DEC's users group, DECUS. And here are the group of the women working in one of the buildings, manufacturing a nice, clean, later air-conditioned environment without pigeons. Okay, these are the stars. By the time they had a PDP-8 and a PDP-11, the PDP-8 was introduced in '65. There's a fast turnover. You have to think like Apple with cell phones. They were rolling out new machines. They were creating basically a technology moat between them and competitors. They were hiring the best and the brightest. They were spending a tremendous amount of money in research, creating the next machine so that the competition couldn't catch up with what DEC was doing. And it was competitive within the company. You could propose an idea within the company, and if it got approved, you were put in charge of it, nice way to get promoted, and told to go forward. In fact, one of the things I've often heard is, if you're going to criticize something, come up with a solution at the same time. I don't want to hear no. I want to hear no but. And that was one of the attitudes DEC always had, was we can do better. We can do better, we can do faster. So the first machine, the 8, sold over 50,000 copies over the lifespan. Initial price was $18,500. Another MIT story. Bob Metcalf, a graduate student, arranged for a short-term loan of a PDP-8 for a demonstration. Well, that morning, when he went into the audience to do the demonstration, it was gone. It had been stolen. DEC's public relations department turned the crime into promotion. As they put it, the only computer small enough to steal. Metcalf, this was not a setback for him either, went on to invent the Ethernet, the precursor to the internet. The company went public, as we mentioned before, in 1966 at $22 a share. If you remember that AR&D owned 70% from the initial venture capital investment, when AR&D was itself purchased in 1972, the price was $450 million, not dollars, $450 million, not bad for return of initial investment of $70,000. The major asset was DEC, and George Didio had served as a mentor for Ken throughout much of the time that the two overlapped. The PDP-11 reached the market in 1970 and was insanely successful, selling more than 600,000 units all over the world. Fulfilling service contracts on these installations in person, having to have people in person in other countries, made DEC the international company and multilingual company that it became. Now, I couldn't find an actual image of a stock certificate, but this is an image of a bond certificate, which I think with the same sort of symbolicity, and this was just one of the ways of raising money. So I'm guessing this image is the bond. I learned that an allegorical image of a slightly underdressed woman holding the globe was almost standard in stock certificates at the time. It was used quite often. In this case, you notice that in the close-up, there she is, and the machine behind her is a PDP-12. Some of you remember that at one point when Playboy Company went public, their first stock certificate also included a woman about this gauzily dressed and also holding the globe. So again, it was a common image to put on stock certificates. Okay, come the revolution. Fax was a leap. Fax was a tremendous computer bet to basically take a leap past what they were doing with the PDPs. So after 20 years of PDP Next, developed again in 75, it was launched in 77. The system was flexible, it was robust, it was scalable. You could hook up machines, you could run multiple things on it, it was upgradable. 4 billion in sales by 82, 11 billion in sales by 88. There were actually VAX clones being knocked off in the Soviet Union. They were good enough to run VAX software. Now Olson was still a busy man with this. Here he is in his standard shirt and tie, standing outside the building with that sign digital. He took an active, perhaps hyperactive role in everything the company was doing. Matrix management rewarded people who proposed ideas and took risks, but Olson did not suffer fools. For a wealthy man, he lived modesty. For a while, he was driving either a pickup truck, an old Ford Pinto to work. Then Ford Motor Company invited him to be on their board and insisted he start driving a Lincoln, which he did. But occasionally on weekends, he'd still show up in the pickup truck. Unbeknownst to Ford, his wife drove a Mercedes-Benz. Olson had a habit of showing up at satellite facilities unannounced, either by the helicopter or airplane or somewhere else. One story goes that he got to the front desk at Reading, Massachusetts facility, and the receptionist asked to see his ID. So he pulled out his deck badge number 1. She was dubious, and she asked for some other ID. So he patiently showed her his driver's license. Did we skip one? Oh, the other side, there's Olson multitasking. He's donating blood in one of the DEC blood drives and also reading the document at the same time. DEC generated a lot of paper for Computer Company. They had corporate newsletters, dictionaries, culture guidelines. You can read some of the culture guidelines over there by the Mini Ken. Business plans, Woods meetings, retreats for upper management. So there was just an awful lot going on DEC to develop and build the DEC culture. Okay, this took a lot of research to dig into this period, this critical period for DEC, but I was glad to be able to do it and finally come up with an understanding of what was going on. From the top down, DEC made a strenuous and constant effort to diversify its workforce beyond white and male, which would have been the simple and common thing to do for a tech company. And still today, is still dominant in the tech industry. In '74, he hired John Sims, an African American, as manager of affirmative action and equal opportunity employment. John rose to become a vice president of corporate personnel. The company supported technical education programs and deliberately located manufacturing facilities in minority communities. Barbara Walker, a black lawyer with civil rights experience in the federal government, started core groups of employees at the company to educate all employees that affirmative action is for everyone. This evolved into a Valuing Differences program that acknowledged differences rather than pretend they did not exist. DEC gained a reputation as a good workplace for women, for minorities, and for people of other than a heterosexual orientation. Decades ahead of its time. This is an infamous quote. DEC is speaking at the 1977 World Future Society contest. Apple II came out in '77. The IBM PC didn't reach until 81. He's quoted as, "There is no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home." He was right at the time. His concept was computers were evolving so quickly that anything you had in your home was going to become rapidly obsolete. Instead, he envisioned there'd be computers serving communities connected by hardwired to people's homes where they would have a terminal and a printer and a storage facility, but not an actual computer. And this actually became the business model for things running off mini computers. So you had terminals everywhere, but he, at this time, said he was thinking it shouldn't happen or it's prematurely. This is the quote, this is the infamous quote he's remembered for, because in time he was proven wrong. You have to remember the IBM PC was 4 years away. And I don't know how about it is with any of you, but I remember myself going through every couple of years needing another computer because the software got bigger and got faster, and I had a televideo and a couple of Dells, a couple of others, and it always seemed like $2,000 every couple of years. And I ended up owning a series of paperweights, boat anchors. So he was sort of right. And the point was, you could have a dumb terminal connected to a network that provided you software upgrades, and he also thought it would be far too premature for anything in the home to be managed by computers. But these days, we're starting to see smarter and smarter homes. I don't know if I need my phone connected to my dishwasher, or my toaster, or my garage door, or my hot tub, but these things are possible. DEC did enter the fray on personal computers, but it failed badly. It launched 3 machines, not compatible with what was becoming the IBM standard, and also not compatible with each other. This was part of the Matrix system failing in that it put its resources across too many options and said they'll fight it out and the best will win. It lost time and it lost money. Yeah. All 3, the Professional, the DECmate, and the Rainbow 100 failed. By '91, 10 years after IBM, when DEC re-entered the niche with IBM compatible machines, it was too late to get significant market share, even though their machines were probably better than the IBM compatible machines at the time. This is an example of one of the terminals that they sold in the tens of millions. Upgrades went to the VT500 in '93. That particular model sold more than 6 million. But this niche failed away as personal computers could run Terminator emulator software. DEC sold its VT operations in '95. Familiar? Yeah. The Digital Federal Credit Union. This was established in '79, dealt with mortgages. As DEC employees were being hired in different places and having a hard time relocating or being hired, and DEC said, oh, we can help you buy a house. We'll have our own, basically, nonprofit credit union. It survived more than 25 years after DEC ended. We still have Digital Credit Union. At the time, it was the largest credit union, headquartered in New England, with over close to 1 million members, and management of its assets exceeded $8 billion. DEC stands by 3 principles. People come first, do the right thing, and make a difference. Now, whether it really stood by those was debatable, because Yelp reviews find scores of 1-star reviews for DEC, with many stating they actually wanted to give it 0 stars. In the summer of 2019, DEC settled a class action lawsuit for $1.8 million for accusations that it triggered overdraft fees by delaying deposits people were making, while at the same time speedily processing debit and credit card charges. They're artificially creating overdrafts and then charging people a penalty for that. I think they've improved, but let's hope they've improved. Okay, we get to some of the things we do remember. DEC World. It started as DEC Town, internal in '82, and then it grew. Finally, what DEC realized is it didn't have to be just for DEC employees. You can invite outsiders to the exhibits, to the new equipment rollouts, and make a big thing of it. So it grew to DEC World. The event in 1987 actually brought 42,000 people to Boston. Hotels were 100% booked. Jack Seals, who was marketing senior vice president at the time, said, oh, I know, let's charter the Queen Mary too. And by the way, this bar also chartered the Starship Oceanic, which later became Disney's cruise ship, for the duration of the convention. The event cost DEC an estimated $20 million, but they booked more than $1 billion in business. The last was April 1992, and as we do know, Ken Olsen was asked to resign in July of '92. DEC was already starting to decline. There was also the helipad. This is where the whole Market Basket complex is now, but I do remember getting here and walking out there and seeing the sign still saying what it says there, in a helicopter landing plane. The pilots, although it was never officially called DEC Air, DEC had this fleet of helicopters servicing facilities. Then again, as we saw here, this was not a senior executive perk. All employees with a reason to visit could sign up. Most of the pilots were Vietnam veteran pilots. Freight planes also moved parts to Puerto Rico, to Ireland, and elsewhere. Employees could catch a ride on those too, but it was sort of Spartan, handful of seats bolted to the floor, sharing the crew's toilet. I do will say some of the helicopters, they sort of were willing to fly in all weather, and maybe a little bit too scarily so, but as far as I know, they all got where they were supposed to be going when they took off. DEC went through a few logos. The original logo was replaced by lowercase letters, short-lived period to go all caps. Each PDP version had its own color, but once IBM became Big Blue, digital sort of switched on digital blue. But after that became too much of a we're following you, we're after you, we're not quite you. DEC changed its colors to burgundy. In 1993, well into the layoff era, there was one last stab at redesigning the logo modestly with round dots over the eyes, black between the burgundy rectangles. This was perhaps equivalent to the orchestra playing as the Titanic sank. Changing the logo was not going to save the company. So, there's digital's blue. There's that last logo change, burgundy and ugly. You notice square dots over the eyes, round dots over the eyes. Not enough to change the company. For those of you who were here at that time, those are two very full parking lots. Olson would occasionally get to town a little bit early and stop off at Donut Land to have breakfast on Mason Street. One morning, an employee approached him and said, I'm going to have a hard time finding a parking space. I get to work, you know, and it's really hard to find a place to park. And Olson said, well, when's your shift start? He said, well, 8. And Olson said, I bet if you got here at 7:30, you'd have no problem finding a parking space. So again, that's an engineer's solution. Let me fix your problem. The next person's going to end up back in the center.
There's a shuttle too, vans that would go loop around the parking lot.
Wasn't aware of that, but then there's a better solution. I'm going to call that here. So the board of directors, Al Sultan, resigned in July of '92. He was 66 years. He had been president for 35 years. Okay. I'm going to read this because it's worth saying. For the thousands of employees working for DEC within the Empowering Metrics Management System and mantra of do the right thing, this was a heart-wrenching event. A forum comment from one employee. I used to drive to the office in the morning and I couldn't wait to get to work. I love my job and the company environment. The company doesn't love itself anymore. Now I drive to work in the morning and all I can think about is getting out of this company and doing something else. So that's the problem with the mythos developing around a founder is sometimes it's hard for the company to evolve past that. And especially with such a strong personality here as Ken, it was just difficult. So we say here that, okay, we say do the right thing, but a number of things were the wrong thing. And these people say, okay, they missed the PC and that was the main cause of the failure. But there were multiple contributions to why DEC ended up winding down. Circa 85, DEC decided to compete with IBM for client data management and mainframes. This led to hiring of close to 27,000 people in just 2 years. So there was a digest that problem. They also started working on the VAX 9000 in an attempt to compete with IBM in the mainframe space. This ate $3 billion and failed. Not invented here meant that DEC insisted on internal development of all hardware and software, failing to adapt to what were becoming industry-wide standards and suppliers that could supply the same type of equipment at a lower cost. A troubled entry into the microcomputer niche initially failed. By the time DEC went IBM compatible, it was too late. The competition in many computers' workstations got hot, and service contract income shrank as equipment became reliable. When equipment stopped failing, you didn't need as much service, and you didn't need service contracts to serve it. And equipment just became extremely reliable, and DEC was sort of getting sandwiched here between the mainframes and the PCs behind them, squeezing what was happening in the middle. Lastly, downsizing was delayed and severance packages were too generous. And that's all in good faith, but it did chew up too many millions of dollars for being slow on layoffs and paying people too much. But that was part of Ken's feeling of loyalty and reciprocality of loyalty was in downturns we'll keep everyone. We'll sign in the research, we'll do things, we'll do better things, we'll take our time, and we'll come back stronger. And had worked for a number of iterations, but it failed in the 90s. So digital in decline. The layoffs that began continued. There were hiring freezes, there were reorganizations. So Robert Palmer, who had joined the company in '85, became president in 1992, later adding titles of CEO and chairman of the board. Internally, he was perceived as competent but not visionary. Over 6 years, he oversaw hiring freezes, reorganizations, layoffs of 60,000 people, plant closings, sales of assets, downsizing cost the company over $5 billion. By '98, the company was small enough to sell itself to Compaq for $9.6 billion. Was this sale inevitable? I'm going to say probably not. DEC could have probably have continued as a mid-level company, even though it no longer attracted the best and brightest and stayed strong within a niche. But its reputation, its image had been so tarnished that it really couldn't see itself reinventing itself. Was the decline unique to DEC? It was not. IBM's workforce in the same period of the 1900s shrank from 400,000 people to 220,000 employees, 50%. IBM came close to also selling itself off for parts and giving up. They brought in an outside person as CEO and managed to do a turnaround. Companies that failed or disappeared or were acquired: Data General, Wang, Prime Computer, Lotus, Apollo, Tandem. These were all Boston area companies that failed, folded, or acquired around this time. It was a horrific shakeout in the entire industry as it went from being growth to basically commodity. And if you understand that concept of growth to commodity, anyone in this room who is deeply invested in NVIDIA is believing in a company that for the moment has a moat between itself and its super chips and everyone else. In time, that moat will close, competition will become more even in the field, and super fast chips will become a commodity. Not this year, maybe not next year, but just understand, please diversify your portfolio. Even in decline, DEC had some wonderful things going on. The Alta Vista search engine that was launched in '95 was the most popular until Google came to dominate the market 5 years later in 2000. And here's the story behind the story. Larry Page and Sergey Brin had actually approached DEC in 1997, hoping to be acquired for the value of their startup company called Google and its algorithm. DEC declined, didn't quite see where the profit was going to be in this. They persevered with Google, and each are now worth in excess of $100 billion.
And Google was a clone.
And there was Ask Jeeves. There was a whole slew of search engines that didn't figure out how to financially monetize that. Here, by the way, is the mill complex with the empty parking lots. Recently built a fire station on one of them, and I don't know, right now the mill, let me say what I'm going to say about here. The mill has been through two owners, both have rented out space to other companies. From 1998 to 2015, it was Clock Tower Place. Currently, it's called Mill and Main. It's a little bit less than 50% rented. This sort of brings some suffering on the numerous restaurants in town because the employees used to pour out of those buildings lunch for dinner, for parties afterwards, for ordering pizza, and that's just become but the restaurants carry on, and the mill space is there, but there is a surplus right now of office and light industry space around the country, all across New England. So it's not quite clear when that might ever be full and bustling again. Largest tenant right now is Acacia Communications, very low profile. It did go public at one point, it was worth several billion, and then it was acquired by Cisco. The Parker Street complex was only recently raised, finally, and redeveloped as Maynard Crossing, a residence and commercial mix. There's a building up on Acton Street,
Yeah.
concrete, brutal, narrow windows that is now the, I think, state police facility for Kennedy. Powder Mill headquarters. So if you were around long enough to know they moved the headquarters out of the complex to a new complex on Powder Mill Road. The facility was a later home to Stratus Technologies. Stratus moved into the mill buildings. It now stands empty. There was a plan for a while for a China-linked private school, but that stalled.
On Powder Mill Road itself is another place that had, I think even before that,
Yeah.
and that's now a storage area.
Right, they're on the street, they're basically a storage facility. The mill complex also has a storage facility in it. These are some lower, we'll call them low-rent tenants. This is the Powder Mill complex showing the Burgundy logo. After the fall, this is Gordon College. In June 2006, Gordon College dedicated the Ken Olson Science Center. Olson joined the board of trustees in this Wyndham mess in '61 and over decades provided significant financial support. Little story, little backstory. For this event, a letter was read from Bill Gates of Microsoft. He stated, "My interest in software was inspired by the DEC computer I first used as a 13-year-old at the Lakeside School." So Bill cut his teeth on a PDP. Publicly, next to the river, we have this little plaque, it's Ken Olson Plaza, and a little history billboard there explaining some of the history about digital. And I will tie this back to the only in Maynard. Only in Maynard can a multi-billion-dollar company disappear in 7 years. Only in Maynard can a company's credit union outlast it by decades. Only in Maynard can ex-employees still remember their badge numbers. Only in Maynard can a modest Riverside display be all there is to signify 41 years of mini-computer excellence. I think that's the end of what I have to say, but I'd love to hear questions and comments. And again, before you leave, consider buying as a souvenir and only in Maynard.